When people lead with their creativity, they generate purpose and meaning in their work, and they consistently drive business value. I'm Dr. Natalie Nixon, and I change lives with ideas. I'm a creativity strategist, the president of Figure 8 Thinking, a global keynote speaker, and the author of the award-winning book, The Creativity Leap. I advise leaders on transformation by applying wonder and rigor to amplify their business value. And I do that in two ways, through the lenses of creativity and foresight. Some of the questions that my clients have would be, what's the business that we should be in versus the business that we've been churning in? And how do we figure out our meaning and our purpose? There are two types of experiences I offer: keynote speaking and advisory services. I'm a global keynote speaker, and I'm often hired by CHROs, chief strategy officers, and chief innovation officers, as well as event planners to deliver a keynote at your next event. I also offer strategic advisory sessions, both one-on-one as well as Foresight Studios for your teams. Nothing makes me happier than when my clients get those aha moments where they self-identify as creative and they understand that creativity is actually the essential engine for innovation. That's the power of applying creativity, toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. I help you shift your paradigm to amplify your business value. Awesome. Welcome everybody. Hi there. My name is Natalie Nixon. I'm the CEO and founder of Figure 8 Thinking, and I'm so excited to be in conversation today with Erin Shrimpton, who is an organizational psychologist based in Ireland. And Erin is also a LinkedIn learning instructor. Erin's course, in case you are interested in checking out, which we highly recommend, Erin's course is called Leading Culture Change in Your Team. And we will put a link to that continuing throughout our conversation. Hi, Erin. Good to see you.
Hello. Hi, Natalie. I'm really good. How are you?
I'm awesome. And where in Ireland are you today?
I'm in Dublin, so in the capital city. So slightly south of the capital, just right by the sea here where I am.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Well, I am in Philadelphia, the east coast of the United States, where we're getting teasings of spring, but it's highly likely that temperatures will drop again. What's the weather like over by the sea in Ireland?
Exactly the same. And yeah, I've been out for my walk around this morning, and it was definitely pretty biting. But yeah, we've had a couple of days of, is the temperature lifting a little bit? And you get a bit excited.
Yeah, hope remains eternal. Well, listen, I'm really excited to be in conversation with you today because as an organizational psychologist, one of your areas of expertise is organizational culture. And we've shared with each other, just as background, getting ready for this conversation, that, part of my background is in cultural anthropology. And I keep saying that I should make a t-shirt. I'm going to make it in 2023, a t-shirt that says, "It's culture, silly," because it seems like so often a lot of our challenges in our organizations and the ways we're approaching work are around culture. So we're going to get into that today. But I first want to start with a question for you, which is, tell me more about why you decided to become an organizational psychologist, and what exactly does that mean?
Oh, yeah, good question. Well, I've always been really interested in work, which might sound like a slightly odd thing to be interested in, even from a young age. But I've always been kind of interested in the idea, culturally, work has always seen as a bit of a drag. There's the Sunday scaries and people are dreading going to work, but we spend so much of our time there. And actually, when you delve into it, many of us have brilliant experiences at work. And, we do spend a lot of our days there. And actually, yes, there are bits of it that are a pain and we don't really like, but actually a lot of what we do in our work is fulfilling and meaningful. So I wanted to understand what are those elements of work that actually help us to stay well, help us to be better people, and help us to stay connected with other people as well. And so I did my degree initially in psychology, then went and moved to to the big smoke in London, and spent a number of years just working, and learning about the world of work. And then I thought, now's the time to kind of translate that psychology degree into the organizational psychology. So I went back and did a master's in that then. So yeah, it was really just an interest in, I'm very interested first and foremost as a psychologist, as in, how do we survive and thrive in our days? And work is a place that we go to every day, or a thing that we do every day. And, it's a big vehicle to access people, to understand how to get to them. So that was really, I think that was
well, I really love how you added in the word thrive as we're thinking about work, because that certainly is one of the goals I have in my work, is to help people thrive and flourish in their work environments. Obviously, I'm a bit biased. I think a great place to start with that is to build our creative capacity. And I know that for you, you can't do your work as an organizational psychologist without dealing with culture. So I guess my next question for you is, how do you define culture? How do you try to think about culture? There's so many ways we can think about. How do you like to think about culture?
So many. And well, I always hark back to one of the kind of original definitions of organizational culture by researchers Deal and Kennedy, and they defined it back in 1982, almost as old as I am. How we do things around here,
Yeah.
So. And it's a simple way of describing it, but when you ask people, that's how they describe it.
But how we do things around here. That's awesome.
How we do things around here. And I kind of delve a little bit deeper into it when I'm really getting into talking to people and organizations about culture. Sometimes I don't even use the word culture, because when you start to use the word culture, it brings alongside it a lot of connotations, and people start to think, oh, well, let me tell you about the culture here, Whereas actually, if you ask people, what's your experience today? What's your experience on a day-to-day basis? Or tell me about what happened last week on this day or at this event. That's where you start to really get into cultural norms, because you start to hear about people's experiences. You start to hear about what is actually happening to them. And we know now from neuroscience how much our experience on a day-to-day basis shapes how we think, shapes what we do. So I really like to think about experience as a big lens that I look at through culture, to understand culture. It's an interesting one to work very much in organizational culture, but try not to use that word.
Yeah, well, I love that, because you're really pointing out something that I emphasize frequently, which is ask a different question, reframe the question. And I love how you so agilely reframed it, not using the word culture, but instead shifting it to asking people about what did they experience at that particular event in that particular moment. And in that way, so much is revealed. I love the way you say that one way to define culture is how we do things around here. Another way that I often think about culture is what people say about you guys when you're not around, right? What people say about you when you're not in the room. That's also another way to think about culture. And then the bit more academic-y part of me also likes to say that kind of signifiers of culture are language, are artifacts, are rituals. In our work, we have rituals, right? We have language, a lot of sometimes / jargon around the way we describe what we do. And we have artifacts. I think I often point to meetings as one of the biggest, sometimes problematic artifacts in most work environments. Anything that you would highlight about language or ritual or artifacts when it comes to organizational design and work culture?
I think it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Especially in light of how our workplaces have changed in the last couple of years, because often there are particular ways that people talk about things and you don't even notice it you know, you don't even notice, you know, if you're in an office and you overhear conversations, you're not even, it starts to become just part of the norm. We're not hearing that as much anymore. We're not hearing, you know, the language is, you know, it's all very much more formal in a kind of a Zoom or Microsoft Teams kind of environment. And we're not seeing as many artifacts either. So, and again, you know, everything from, I used to do when, you know, back in the days when people were in an office a lot, I used to do a lot of sort of what I would call the walk around, very technical name for what is essentially just going in, sitting in the reception, going around all the office spaces and watching and observing what's going on.
Yes.
And you see so many artifacts, things like little, like, you know, I'd ask, what is that? And they'd say, oh, it's a bell. We ring that bell every time someone makes a sale. Or, you know, that is the biscuit tin. And only people in this pod can eat from this biscuit tin.
Right.
Right. So there's lots of different little tiny cultural notes that sort of send signals to people. You know, this is we're the in group here with this biscuit tin. And
right.
And so that's transforming a lot. So that's one of the things I am.
It is.
How it plays out over the coming years. You know, how are we still holding on to some of these kind of rituals, artifacts, things that kind of tell us how we do things around here when we're working virtually.
Yeah. Well,
that's one of the things that, you know, I know from your work with inquiry and asking questions and thinking about, you know, instead of telling people how to do things, it's all around asking. So do you have a view on how we kind of get under the bonnet of that?
Well, one of the things I definitely recommend as any leader or member of a team that's trying to shift to what I would call a culture of inquiry, leading with questions, is I always like to start with sharing what not to do, right? So if you're trying to get your team to open up more and be more comfortable with asking questions, maybe don't start by saying, okay, guys, give me your best questions. I'm all ears. Because typically you will get responses like deer in the headlights, just staring at you, terrified. I don't want to be the first to ask a question, or crossed arms or hands on the hips, because a lot of us have been question shamed, right? At some point during our educational trajectory, learning experiences early on in the job, we dared to raise our hand. And sometimes the response was, please share your question. But sometimes the responses were more like giggles, or even worse, you were ignored. And so you very quickly get the signal, we don't ask a lot of questions around here. So one of the things that I love about Warren Berger, who's the author of A More Beautiful Question, the book of Beautiful Questions, is that he talks about how asking questions is actually a way of thinking, right? You can tell so much about a person, a group of people, a team, an organizational culture by the ways that they ask questions, who gets to ask the questions, how questions are framed. If we're talking about what I call only convergent questions, which are more like who, what, when, versus divergent questions, which are like why and what if and I wonder, or we wonder, right? Which are much more expansive. And I always advise teams and leaders to start with those expansive questions, even though it may feel a little threatening because you're opening yourself up to a lot of new. You can always edit down to the conversion. The last thing I'll just say about that, getting back to some great advice from Warren Berger. Warren Berger believes that instead of organizations having mission statements, they should have mission questions, which I love. Yeah, like, because if you're being guided by a question as an organization, doesn't that also imply that you are open to adapt and shift? Because the answer to that question is going to be dependent on the environment and the times and the actors in the organization.
100%. And this is one of the things, you know, when I'm talking to teams and organizations at the moment who are feeling that pinch of uncertainty, feeling nervous about what, you know, where are we going? How are we changing our ways of working? How are we surviving amidst, You know, if you think about it too much amidst, you know, a lot of global uncertainty, I always talk to them, and I think this aligns a lot with your work as well, but I talk to them often about, think about this as more of an experiment in the next year, 2 years. And that aligns really nicely with what you're saying about just, instead of thinking that we have to get to the answer, or we have to know the answer rather, we are just asking a question here, and we're experimenting our way to finding the answer. And that it really is so empowering, you know, and I use that on a daily basis with my parenting, with also trying to figure out, because otherwise if I held myself to account to try and have the answers on everything, I would just be beating myself up all the time, you know, especially over the last couple of years. There's just been so much change and uncertainty. Whereas actually, if you think to yourself, you know what, okay, I'm not totally sure how this is going to play out, but I'm asking the question and I'm curious, and it makes you more interested in it as well, because you're thinking, ooh, I've got to find out.
Well, the admittance of ignorance is a prime sign of servant leadership, right? That I don't know the answer. I'm not sure where this will lead, but we're in this together, and we're going to start with asking better questions. If more leaders, organizations, teams spent, if we think of the Pareto rule, the 80-20 rule, if they spent 80% of the problem solving process in problem definition and framing the question, did we even ask the right question before we go running down this rabbit hole? And I delved a lot into that way of approaching project management and problem solving in my work in design thinking. It's so powerful because it's kind of like the way I was taught many years ago in junior high school. The best way to write a paper is, the hardest part is getting the outline down, getting that annotated outline down is the problem definition. And then the writing really does just kind of follow. But I love what you said about advising your clients to think about it as a year-long, 2-year-long experiment. We are 1,000% aligned in that way, Erin, because one of the frameworks I like to share is something called the 3 I's. That's the way we can operationalize creativity, toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And those 3 I's are inquiry, which we've been talking about, intuition, which we could delve into if we want to a little later, and improvisation. And improvisation is about your willingness to be experimental, saying yes, and it's all about the build. And here's the cool thing about the way you phrase it to your clients of, let's treat this as an experiment. There's 3 possible answers to an experiment. Yes, we're on the right track. No, this is not what people need or want. This won't work. Or C, we were going this direction. It's not exactly 2.0, it's 2.3, right? That is a variation of what we thought. And now let's start to explore that further. So it's a very powerful reframing.
So no matter what you're learning.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. And hasn't the buzzword, especially the first decade of the 2000s was all about becoming a learning organization. And what better way to become a learning organization, have learning be the core of your organizational culture, if you're starting with questions, building curiosity, and building this appetite for experimentation and improvisation. I wanted to ask you to share with us a story of an organizational culture challenge that you've helped navigate. And you can be as specific or as vague as you need to be, but I think that would be super interesting just to get that kind of specific reference point from you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, recently I've been working with an organization where one particular pocket of the organization, so a division of the organization, were struggling really with the culture. I mean, you know, I am going to use the word now, but you know, they were struggling with engagement levels and collaboration with the rest of the organization. They felt very disconnected from the rest of the organization. And of course, the move to remote working didn't really help. So this particular division of the organization were fairly self-sufficient. They didn't really need to collaborate with other parts of the organization. They were just customer facing, and that was, you know, but what was really interesting about that is that they did start to feel the disengagement that comes along with being disconnected from a wider organization. So I still always hark back. I'm citing all the oldies but goodies today, but I still always
That's
hark
okay.
back. Yeah, the Hackman and Oldham model, it's of organization motivation or team motivation, where there's an element of this model they called it task significance. But basically what it means is, do you as an individual understand what contribution you're making and whether that contribution is making a difference in the wider organization? And at some point, we do all need to understand what difference we're making, even if, so I always kind of break it down into three things: engagement with the work you're doing, engagement with the people you work with, and engagement with the organization. And oftentimes you can survive on the first two, but over time you need the third one really to kind of complete the circle. So this particular team were really lacking in that last one, but there were a number, once we delved into it, there were a number of other parts of their ways of working that weren't working either. And we just really took a good look at it and thought, well, seeing as our ways of working have changed by force due to the pandemic so much, why don't we just really look at this and ask the team so we did some.
How about that? Ask the people.
Right?
Who'd have thunk?
I know, right? Revolutionary. So, and my approach with this is always to say, and it's uncomfortable, but it's always to say, ask them, but also give them responsibility to solve the problem as well. And it's uncomfortable for a couple of reasons, because a lot of times leaders don't want to pass that responsibility over. Where is it going to go? But also, to be fair, most of us in our day jobs don't have time to be thinking, to be sitting there trying to solve problems. But the issue is, and the reason I do this is because, well, it's based on participatory action research, which is an organizational development technique to get people really involved with change. But the reality is, if you want people to change their behavior, they are only going to do it if it feels meaningful to them. If it feels like there's a good reason here why I should change. And if you put it to them and say, here, we're going to change your ways of working. We want to change how you experience work day to day. And ultimately, therefore, we're going to change how you experience your life. And actually, when you put it to them in those terms, they think, oh yeah, well, actually, now that you say it, do you know what? I'd really like to set up a mentoring program. I'd really like to work with the rest of the people in the organization with another team in the organization to find out something about how they work. Or I'd love to go in secondment. I'd love to set up a better way of communicating with one another, or let's come up with something creative about how we now connect with one another, because of course people are now, predominantly working remotely. And in answer then to the issue about, how long the time that this takes, well, if you think about what Google do with the 20% time, if you're willing to invest that in potentially coming up with new products, you should definitely be willing to invest it in coming up with better ways of working. And because that's obviously going to be incredibly productive ultimately. And what's always amazing when I do this is that people, initially there's a bit of hesitance, but then people just really get stuck in, they really get stuck into it. And it creates a way for people to work together, a reason to pick up the phone and go, hey, Natalie, do you know what? I was just thinking about this project we're working on together, where otherwise you might not,
Yeah.
So it's meta, but it actually does create a reason for connection as well. So, it's a culture change program, but it actually helps to connect people too, because it's
absolutely. Well, you said so many great things here that I want to thread through, but I also just want to remind anyone who's joining us today, please feel free to add a question into the comments, into the chat. Thank you, Fred, for joining us today. Haven't talked to you in a while, so I'm so happy that you're here. And yes, I am Erin Blythe from Kismet Co-work in Chestnut Hill in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So shout out to Christopher Plant and his entire team. But yeah, please add in questions into the comment section for Erin, for me. We'd be happy to engage in your questions. But your answer to that question was so robust, Erin. I love how you were talking about engagement, a real challenge that people are having, that this particular client is having in terms of connection with each other. I just want to recap that framework, which I thought was brilliant, that there's 3 ways we can engage. We can engage with the work, we can engage with our colleagues, with people around us, and then engage with the larger organization. And you were saying that typically we're good at the first 2. Those are a little easier than the third one. The intersection to my work that I'm seeing that you map out here is that I always remind people that creativity is all about the business and work of meaning making, of purpose making. That when we are invested in building our creative capacity, then we actually build more connection to purpose and meaning in our work and our lives. And the other point, because I was so good, we have a new question in the chat. Let's focus on that question in a sec. The last thing I just want to say is, I also like your advice to this client to ask the people, what are they interested in doing and taking on? What are the gaps that they're noticing, and what are their ideas? Fundamentally, what that's also helping and to do, which is sparking engagement, is that people are being seen and heard. And we know that whether you're talking about a 3rd grade elementary school class for children in school, or talking about a $1 billion valuation multinational corporation, at the end of the day, people want to feel seen and heard. And when you ask them their opinions, that's fundamentally what you're doing. So the next step to purposeful engagement and meaningful connection is a lot easier. It's a lot easier.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a great question from Sam Yankovich. Thank you so much, Sam. Why is the C word avoided by leadership so often? Why is culture as a word avoided by leadership so often? What do you think about that, Erin? Thanks, Sam.
I think it's because, a big reason is because I think leaders worry so much that, think about the typical model where you send out your engagement survey and then it comes back. And then I think it goes back on the shoulders of a leader to solve the problem, doesn't it? And I think often it feels too overwhelming to solve that problem. And, because when you delve into any kind of cultural issue, there's so much legacy, there's history, there's some problematic behaviors, and all of those things are really, really difficult to manage and to deal with. It's much easier to just get your head stuck into a spreadsheet and create a project plan and get on with your life. Whereas we know that actually the barriers to progress in organizations, the barriers to creativity in organizations is always behavioral, always cultural. And so one of the things, to the previous part of this discussion, one of the things I always try and encourage is to say, this isn't your problem to solve. This is everybody. Yes, there's a big role for leaders in role modeling the right behaviors, in, creating psychological safety in an organization so that people do feel that they can ask questions, that they can contribute, that they can make suggestions. But it couldn't possibly be for one person to solve.
No way.
So I think that's it. As if you do go into it with the mindset of actually this is up for all of us, and to help everybody understand what their role is in changing culture. Because if you break it down into a whole organizational level, it's so interesting because there's lots of different people and parts of the organization, and they all have different roles. So, obviously HR has a role in changing culture by enabling through, programs and structures. Leaders have their role, people, and then the middle management level have their role as well. So, I think if you really want to change culture, you realize it's quite a big undertaking, but it is so worth working out. Okay, what are all of our roles here? And then handing over some power and responsibility.
I think that's a huge offering to leaders who initially feel the threat that, oh my gosh, I have to figure this out all on my own. The way I like to frame it as well is that instead of thinking about it as I am the leader, I should be able to figure this out, approach it as co-creation, right? A collaborative effort among all of those levels of the organization that you just outlined, Erin. And in fact, if you're starting with a stance of inquiry-based leadership, leading with questions, leading with curiosity, if you're starting from a stance of servant-based leadership, then that actually is not such a huge gap and leap to make. These are nice conjoined, collaborative, arm in arm baby steps. And so it's all in how you as a leader set it up so that culture does not become this scary monster lurking in the corner that no one wants to talk about, but instead it's everyone's not just job, but it's everyone's opportunity. It's everyone's joyful opportunity, because as you said, Erin, we spend so much of our awake days at work. We have another great question from Christy Mertens. Thank you so much, Christy. And also, just if we'd like to add once more the link to Erin's course. And also I have a course. Erin has a course on, tell us the name of your course so I don't botch it up, Erin. What is the name of your course?
Yeah, the one I think we're talking about, it's leading culture change in your team. I think,
in teams.
Yes.
Yes. So definitely check out Erin's course on LinkedIn Learning. I also have a course. My course is leading with inquiry, improvisation, and intuition, something I call the 3 I's. But Christy, thank you so much for your question. Christy's question is, how do you help teams incorporate attentional culture as a part of improving the what and the how of what they're doing every day, rather than making it an air quotes initiative that falls on a few and then does? I think you did answer some of this in your response. If you want to maybe pull out one particular point, Erin. Thank you for that, Christy.
It's a really, really good question, because often you'll get loads of energy around a culture change initiative and everybody's involved and leaders are up for it. And then, a few months later, people are going, whatever happened to that? We asked all the right questions. We had some brilliant flip charts and, we all came up with great ideas. Often what happens is that actually you try to tackle too much at once. And, there, you do come always, you will come up with, there'll be loads of themes that will come through, things that are important to a lot of people. But the reality is, as we said earlier, we all have day jobs. So we don't have time really to tackle it all at once. So I always say, change one thing at a time. Just find one, even if it's just one small thing, and focus on that, and then change that, and then keep going. Because once you start to see, actually, and once people start to see that they can have impact by just working on one small thing, it actually starts to become part of the norm to get into this cycle of, oh, I've seen that this actually could be better. Can we do something about that? And then that goes on next. So it's really like that kind of changing your mindset by doing something first.
I love that. I call that the baby food method. I literally, that's a very professional term that I use. It's the baby food method. It's baby food. Baby food method. It's reverse engineering the process, right? Deconstructing it into its smaller bits so that we don't lose the momentum, and we can build on one and then the other. And there's one more other thing, great point you made, Erin, about that process. But if it's important enough, it will come back to me. Listen, we are almost rounding out our time. I have one last question for you, Erin, and please, if anyone who's joining us today, if you have an additional question, pop it into the chat. My final question is something we started talking about at the top of our conversation. We were dancing around this new reality of hybrid workplaces. My theory is that eventually the word hybrid work will go away. It will just be the way that we work. I'm curious to know your thoughts about that. But my final question, and again, anyone who's present, if you'd like to drop another question in the chat to really be our final question, please do so. The question is, what do you think are the top 2 challenges that companies and teams are facing as we're still figuring out how to navigate this hybrid work?
I think there's 2 big themes that I'm seeing at the moment for people. And it is, how do we how do we continue to stay connected with our teams and with our organization? And then how are we now setting boundaries around our work when, you know, for the most part, you know, I started even back in my undergraduate psychology degree, I was researching about boundary management in flexible working, and that was well over 20 years ago now. And so I've been interested in this for an awful long time, and I know that the research is there to say that the more autonomy we have over our working day, the better the outcome for us as individuals. It's better for our engagement levels, it's better for our well-being, you know. But there is a flip side to having more autonomy, and that is that it kind of just, everything starts to become much more fluid. Everything's, you know, we used to get up, go to work, and then come home, and work stayed at work, home stayed at home, and there was a nice little, you know, there was a nice gap between. Now it's all just merged into one, and it means that we have to take more responsibility for actually putting those boundaries around our working lives. And not only that for ourselves, but we have to work that out amongst our whole teams as well. So this is another problem. You know, we all have to now come to our teams and say, you know what, this doesn't work for me. And that's challenging for some people. And again, psychological safety comes into that, I think, big time. You know, having a team environment where everybody feels safe to say, you know, this is how I like to work, and this is what I'm willing to compromise on, and this is what I'm not. So I think there's a huge amount of experimentation that needs to be done there, you know, and that's all you can do. Really, it is all about trying out different routines for yourself and for your team, and just working out, okay, this is what works for me, for my energy levels, for my family, for my other work and life commitments. And this is what works for our team. And then, you know, continually just trying out different ways of doing it with people. But it's a bit scary.
It is scary. It is scary. But I always, sorry.
I always think that it's kind of, you know, in a way, work the way it used to be just gave us this framework, and we didn't have to think about it anymore. You know, even though it didn't work clearly, actually now it's kind of like, oh, hang on, what am I getting myself in for here? I don't even really know how to set my working life up.
Now we have to be no. Now we have to be more intentional about that boundary setting. What I'm observing is that we have increasingly blurred boundaries, which is a bit off-putting. But you know, where a lot of us are doing our Zoom and Teams and virtual meetings from, we have our we're in our home offices. We have our pets or our children off to the side, our spouses, and or the tea kettle going off, or the landline phone going off, right? So already we've already tipped in to these blurred boundaries. And I don't want to put you on the spot right now, Erin, but maybe later, if you could email me if you find it, the research. I think that's so interesting when you're saying that the research is showing that the more autonomy we have, it actually does spark better engagement. It actually does spark more fluid work, and it's definitely a lot more positive for our well-being. And then I can add that into the notes of the conversation on LinkedIn a little later. I'm just curious myself. So please definitely follow up with me on that. Yeah, so just to recap the comments in the comments in the chat, Christy loves your point, Erin, about marginal gains. Sam is just kind of plus oneing, and thank you for all the great tips you've shared today. And we're going to round out this really inspiring and helpful and practical conversation because of your expertise, Erin, today on organizational culture as an organizational psychologist. I am going to start asking all of my guests the same question, and full transparency. Erin does not know what this question is. I did not prep her for this in advance. I'm improvising a bit. Oh, wait, actually, maybe let's just do one last question, and then I'll ask you my surprise question. It's not that hard, I don't think. Isabel Davis has the final question for today, which is, in hybrid teams, what about the missing out of remote workers? Great question. Passive networking or sharing at the water cooler, getting coffee, in terms of sharing and building relationships. Love that question, Isabel. Your thoughts about that, Erin?
Yeah, and because I mentioned that as the kind of the first big challenge for teams and organizations now, because we are really missing these moments, aren't we? And although, again, I'm finding it fascinating, actually, even the sort of the younger generation, who you'd think, people in their 20s might be more keen to go into an office because they're more keen to probably socialize and all of that. Actually, they're still choosing to work remotely and from, or from anywhere. So, because they're interested in just facilitating their outside of work lives as well. So I think that's really interesting. So, we have to go with that, but it does mean that we're having fewer water cooler moments. We're having fewer of those kind of impromptu coffees with people who we work with. So you said the word earlier, Natalie, it's all about intentional. It's all about getting, so for leaders, setting up times to get people together during the working day, for no other reason but to connect with one another. And then the second part of it is probably to just hark back to what I said earlier about culture change or changing your ways of working in your team, because always when I find that you get people to work on something meaningful like that together, there is always a side effect of them connecting with one another. And like that, they're more likely to pick up the phone and say, hey, you know what, I was thinking about this issue that we're trying to solve. And there are more kind of impromptu kind of water cooler moments there. But there's loads of great ideas coming out, like having these impromptu Zoom calls where people just come along and have a coffee together. I'm seeing people who work out that they actually geographically do live quite close to one another. So instead of having a meeting on a Zoom call, they go and have a coffee together somewhere. And this is where we're going to be asking for your advice, Natalie, because to be honest, this is all about getting creative.
It really is. It really is. And this actually links well to so many of the things that you're talking about, Erin. We are a nice Venn diagram. There's lots of alignment. Yeah. A lot of the way I'm framing my work now is in terms of something I call invisible work. And Morgan, my project manager, if she can maybe quickly find, in case people are interested, a link to a Fast Company article I wrote where I talk about how our invisible work is actually key to our most productive selves. And I'm not talking about the gendered version of invisible work, which spoke to the realities of the unaccounted for unpaid labor that women do. What I am proposing, I'm trying to be a bit provocative here, is that our most productive selves are not when we're on Zoom. They're not when we're at the whiteboard. They're not when we are churning through email. They're when we step away from the laptop. It's when we are going for a walk, when we're daydreaming, when we are resting, when we're engaged in meaningful conversation that seemingly has nothing to do with the work at hand, and is actually firing up neural synapses in deeper regions of our brain to give us a bit of a release from that frontal neocortex cognitive load. And then that's why when we awake, when we're in the shower, when after a brisk walk, we go back to the laptop, things suddenly synchronize, or we have an aha moment. And so that ability in the midst of not having the traditional water cooler moments, but being able to intentionally be creative about either gamifying the way we meet when we do meet, for leaders to help put the boundaries and saying, no email responses, no meetings between, you can do baby steps. One Wednesday afternoon a month, if you could stomach that, if it's not every Wednesday afternoon, because some people say that's too much, what if our clients need us? But it's interesting, clients actually respond to the boundaries that we set. Thank you, Morgan. Morgan added the link to that article in the chat. But that's I think where we're going, because we need new metrics of productivity, right? The old metrics of productivity were about how many widgets you're producing, with that industrial economy model. And now in the fourth industrial revolution, where tech is taking over, bots and AI, et cetera, are taking over basic tasks, the companies, in my view, that are going back to a word you used earlier, Erin, thrive and flourish, will be the ones that make more room for what make us uniquely human. And it's that creative capacity, and giving us the space and time to build that creative capacity so that we can truly be innovative when we are coming back together at work. So that's just a teaser about a lot of the ideas I'm working on and formulating.
It's music to my ears, Natalie, because it's exactly how I love to work. I was no good in an environment where I had to sit there and be, you know, in meeting after meeting and producing.
Most of us are not.
No.
It's contributing to unprecedented amounts of burnout. Most of us are not. Okay, so we've got to sadly come to an end. You were such a joy to talk to, Erin. I hope to see you in person in Dublin one day. Just saying.
Oh, or
and so we've put in the chat where you can find Erin's course. Once again, the name of Erin's LinkedIn learning course is Leading Culture Change in Your Team. Please check that course out. If you're curious about mine, it's called Lead with Inquiry, Improv, and Intuition. And here's my final question to Erin. I'm a big fan of saying, be a clumsy student of something, of anything. It could be auto mechanics or gardening, or for me, it's ballroom dance. So my question to you, Erin, as we sign out today is either what are you currently a clumsy student of, or if not, just to put a little fire under your bum, what would you like to become a clumsy student of?
Well, I've loads of things that I'd like to become a clumsy student of, but I'll tell you, actually, it's interesting that you should ask me this question, because just at the weekend, I decided to recover some cushions on some old dining chairs that we have. And do you know what? The outcome is fine. Because if you look at it from the end, I got my staple gun out, I covered the cushions and I stapled. But if you look underneath, it is clumsy is the word to use. It is, really, really clumsy. Actually, I managed it. And I just thought, it's been sitting there looking at me for the last few weeks. And I thought, I have no idea how to do that. But do you know what? I'm just going to take it out and try it. And it's not a very good job. But the outcome is fine. And it was, so yeah, maybe one day I'll get better at it. I'll do a proper.
Well, I love that, because it keeps us humble. It sparks those three eyes. It sparks you to ask new different questions, to not be afraid to be experimental, to follow your intuition and those internal nudges. And I encourage you to keep digging into that fabrication, textile work, and upholstery work. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Erin, for being part of our conversation today. Thank you for leading the conversation today. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And again, we're going to add into the comments later on LinkedIn some of that great research that Erin referenced. I know I'm interested in digging a little further into that. And thank you so much, Morgan Wells, who helped to produce this show today, and to Christopher Plant of Kismet Co-work in Philadelphia, which is where I am coming to you live from today. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Goodbye, everyone.